This test work. Okay. The Wordsmith here from faith.org. I'm with my new friend and brother, Vinnie DeStefano, who's working for an organization to do with the defense of Julian Assange. And I'm sorry for the lighting right now. The lighting for Vinny's going to be much better, but at least you can hear me. I know that I'm here, both in person and in spirit, there with you. I'm going to turn it around now. We're going to talk to Vinny and get good insights into what they're doing and what's happening here right now. Vinny, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic now, better than I'm here with you, Ed.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. And still, even though it's been only 5 minutes, I'm still the man, myth, and the legend.
Well, as Ed said, my name is Vinnie DeStefano. I'm the National Organizing Director for Assange Defense USA. We're an organization that works in concert with Assange organizations all around the globe, working for the same cause, and that is to see that Julian Assange is free to go back to the work that he was doing with WikiLeaks. Now, the work of WikiLeaks continues, but Julian is in prison. The reason that we came together to form Assange Defense was because we saw the existential threat that the prosecution of Julian Assange meant not only to him, not only to WikiLeaks, but to the very concept of investigative journalism and freedom of speech. If he is prosecuted, as the Obama administration said, it represents the New York Times problem. That means that any president of the United States, any government around the world could choose, as the United States has done, much to their eternal shame, they could accuse a person who's not a citizen, who's never set foot in their soil, who's printed truthful information that is in the benefit of the public, and they could call them off to their country, and they could take and put them in jail, again, for truthful information. And so when we came together in 2019, Assange Defense didn't exist, but there was an umbrella organization called the Courage Foundation, which is an organization that was formed for the protections of whistleblowers, principally with the courageous Chelsea Manning. My comrade and my boss, Nathan Fuller, ran that organization. He was part of the ad hoc group that came together with people all over the country, lawyers, people from the Pacifica Network, people from the ACLU, and just people who had an interest in this case. And we came together to see what we could do. The very first event that we put together was a webinar. Not a webinar, this was before webinars. This is actually an in-person symposium that included Barry Pollock, Julian's legal representative here in the United States, Margaret Kunstler, who, along with Tariqa Lee, did the great book In Defense of Julian Assange, Marjorie Cohen, Stephen Brody, and a host of other people, luminaries with vastly better CVs than I have, because I'm just an activist, but these were actual lawyers and intellectuals. And we came together, and since then, we've been working diligently to see that the case of Julian Assange is brought to the public in as broad a manner as it can be. Now, that's incredibly important, because although Julian's case is known around the world, in my own country, the country that is responsible for Julian's incarceration, recently, 2 years ago, when the Biden administration had the Summit of the Americas, so-called Summit of the Americas, which they disinvited many of the portions of South America and Central America, including Cuba, we held our own event called the People's Summit. I had an Assange table there. It was made up of activists and socialists and communists and labor union leaders and people of the right of all stripes to come together to show our solidarity to the people that had been disinvited and to talk about the things that were important to us. Now, there were many symposiums there on Julian, but the reason I mention that is when I was at my table, young, intelligent, committed activists would come up, and the first question I would ask him is, do you know who Julian Assange is? And I was gobsmacked in the beginning to realize that 90% of those kids that came up, and I call them kids, but I had the boundless respect for them, they would say no. They might know who WikiLeaks was or what WikiLeaks did, but they didn't know Julian. And it occurred to me that was not by accident. That happened because Julian, first and foremost, had been in exile in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years and then in prison for 2 years. So for these young activists in their 20s, in their early 30s, Julian had been erased for most of their life. Not only erased, not only just erased and not talked about, but when they talked about him, he was vilified repeatedly with lies and misrepresentations that gave an impression of this man being either he was a non-entity, a ghost, or the most horrible person in the world. And our job was to change that, to make certain that everybody worldwide knew, because we see this as a threat, not just in America, but everywhere in the world, against journalists of all stripes. The Gaza situation right now, more journalists have been killed in the brief span that has occurred since, in the World War II. More journalists killed in Gaza than in World War II. So the war on journalism is alive and well and living. If we want to see, regardless of what your political stripe is, I've talked to Trump supporters, I've talked to neoliberal Democrats, I've talked to all of them and said, the case of Julian Assange is not a left or right, a blue or a red, a libertarian or a communist issue. It is an issue for everybody that believes in the sanctity of the press and the people's right to know what their governments, whichever governments they are, do in their name and with their tax dollars.
And Vinny, when did you kind of get involved in the fight for, I guess, for what's right, whatever that might have been in the past, I guess even pre-Julian's case, when did you kind of get involved in fighting?
I can answer that question very easily. I grew up in Pasadena, California. I went to high school out there, but I was surrounded, again, by people who were smarter. And I didn't come from a politically active family at all. They were middle-of-the-road Democrats who voted in every election. They voted the straight Democratic ticket. But when I got to high school, I met people who were involved in the struggle against the Vietnam War, who were involved in the struggle against the FBI, and slowly but surely, my consciousness was raised. Same thing happened when I went to UCLA and studied at the university there. I studied just after Angela Davis was there, and I've read. All my life I've read. And every book I read helped educate me. I self-educated myself, and I realized that what we were sold to as democracy was something far different than what we experienced as citizens. And as I told you, Ed, my daddy once told me, Vinny, for a man who likes to bitch and complain as much as you do, if you are not part of the solution, you take it to the bank, you are part of the problem. So get your ass out there and make a difference. And that's what I've tried to do all my life.
Well, let me be one of the people that thank you personally and deeply for doing that, for the work that you do, for the fight that you're fighting.
No thanks are necessary, brother. No thanks are necessary. It's the work incumbent upon all of us. And I do it gladly. I do it with a spirit of excitement, because not only are we doing well by doing good, but we're surrounded by a community around the world of people who feel like us. We may be small in numbers, but we are legion in our passion.
That's an absolute fact. Very well put. And so now, let's kind of move into the crux of the situation here. How is it looking? And I know that, look, I'm an eternal optimist. That is me by nature. At the same time, I hear what's being said in the huddles. How's it looking, and what?
Well, I'll quote the great Antonio Gramsci, who died in Mussolini's prison during World War II. And he said, I am a pessimist by my intellect, but I am optimistic by virtue of my will. And that is me to a T. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, but by my will, I refuse the luxury of pessimism. I figure that every day when I get up in America, where homelessness is off the charts, where the inequality is unbelievable, not since the robber baron era of the late 1800s. But I think to myself, I turn the tap on and clean water comes out. I don't live where a 2,000 or 5,000 pound bunker bomb can kill my entire family. I don't live in a radioactive waste dump, so I refuse to pity myself. I want to make a world where everyone has an opportunity. Everyone is equal, a land, country, a world without borders and without an other. I recognize the humanity of everyone that surrounds me. We are all one people. And so, as a relation to the case, I believe there are four things could happen. In a best case scenario, these two judges that are hearing this appeal could decide that they can allow the appeal to go forward and Julian could be set free. Not now, but very shortly. The other thing that could happen is the judges could find against it. And I hate to put it this way, they could slip a bag over Julian Assange's head and they could render him, that is American, for unlawful kidnapping and torture and send him back to most assured conviction and 175-year prison sentence in the harshest prison system in the world. The other thing that could happen is they could deny him his extradition, but allow him the opportunity finally to present his case before the European Court of Human Rights.
Let's do it. Let's get to work.
You bet.
My brother, pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure was all mine.